Dads with Nerdy Ambitions, your go-to podcast for all things nerdy. I'm your host, Steve Pugh, and join with me today, as always, is my wonderful, my impeccable, I've got a little bit of haterade for him, Mr. David Perry, who is going to be going to the Star Wars Galactic Hotel. Do you have a confirmed date with that, David, by the way?
It's July of next year.
I hate you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special episode tonight. We have a special guest. The amazing Sandy Petersen from Petersen Games is on the show.
It is a pleasure. I'm surprised to hear that it makes you a bad person to stay at the Galaxy Hotel. I'm not saying I've stayed there, but
look, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just jealous.
Jealousy is I understand.
Before we get too far into this episode, Mr. Petersen, I gotta say, you are way better looking in person than you are in your photos. So, for the listeners, just so they know, when I was asking Mr. Petersen here how to introduce himself, he told me, hey, you look way better in your pictures than you do, or in real life than you do in your pictures.
You're not supposed to say that.
He's an amazing man. He's an amazing man. Solid 10.
Yes,
how many kids
I am a dad.
Have?
All of my kids, I am currently actually more of a granddad with Nerdy Ambitions because I have 5 kids and they're grown up and they're not cute. They're adults. And so who cares about them? I don't care about them. But I have 15 grandkids and they're great.
Holy cow.
They're much better than kids in case you have kids. You have kids, you're a dad, right?
Yes, I am.
So let me tell you right now that with you and your kids, there's always a little bit of you when they grow up. There's a little bit of you had to discipline when they were little. They haven't lived up to your expectations or whatever. And so there's always a little bit of like, not hostility, but like tension between you and the kids. But between you and the grandkids, there's nothing but pure love. You spoil the grandkids, you don't suffer the consequences the dads do. And screw them. That guy gave you a lot of trouble when he was 13, right? So the grandkids are best.
It's all of the fun and none of the responsibility.
Exactly.
That's right. David's a granddad too.
Almost 0 grandkid diapers. They mess their pants. Here you go, dad or mom. And then they have to deal with that. And when the kid's done, he comes back and plays with me.
And you introduce your grandchildren to things like slushies and ice cream, and you buy them toys that make noise and involve water.
This is how people
Here's
get murdered.
Here's a whole lot of sugar for you early in the morning, kid. Here's a drum. And here's some permanent markers to draw on your walls.
All the fun, none of the responsibility.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a secret or not, but you're a little bit of a H.P. Lovecraft fan.
Yes, in fact, the first full game I ever did in 1981 was the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and this was also the first Lovecraft game. They are now super common to the point that I got attacked when I did Cthulhu Wars. One of the reviews said, usually people the one bad review I got was a guy who hadn't played it. And he said, this is bad because Lovecraft is overdone, which I kind of agree with. But I figured if I did the first Lovecraft game, shouldn't I get a pass on doing another one? But anyway, that was the first Lovecraft game. And when I did it, literally everyone I knew who heard about Lovecraft had heard about Lovecraft because I had told them. So he was not well known. The Lovecraft Society, the Providence guys that do
the HB Lovecraft
they gave
Society.
Me an award, a greatness in Lovecraft. It was like a full model of statue of Lovecraft. I got one, and Stuart Gordon got one. And the logic was that I started out with Call of Cthulhu in 1981. This started seeping through gaming nerd culture. Right, people started hearing about the game Call of Cthulhu. Even if you play role-playing games for any length of time, even if you don't play Call of Cthulhu, you hear about it, right? And it's been around 40 years. And then Stuart Gordon, in 1985, he does Reanimator, then From Beyond, and then this starts going through the movie geek culture, horror movie culture. And so both these different directions of geekdom and nerddom kind of went through the society and made Lovecraft famous. So
I mean,
that was their argument.
That
makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely, and you actually are celebrating the 40th anniversary, this is your 40th anniversary of Call of Cthulhu as of November 13th.
Yes, just 4 days ago, and I
ago.
launched a video on the topic, which was only 2 minutes long, saying, "Yay! It came out on Friday." It was actually Friday the 13th in November 1981 when it finished printing.
Did you do that on purpose?
No,
just happened to be that way. For the people who are not familiar with your work, can you give us a little bit of detail about who you are?
Starting with the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, the only full-time job I've ever had as an adult is game designer. Unless you count the 2 years I spent teaching game design to graduate students at Southern Methodist University. That was in 2009 to 2011. That was still related to game design, right? I'm teaching them how to do games. So I got my start there. I worked for 8 years for Chaosium Incorporated, in which I did Call of Cthulhu, which won lots of awards. I did, of all things, the Ghostbusters role-playing game, which also won awards, oddly enough. I helped develop the first version of the Arkham Horror board game, which the current version by Fantasy Flight is much different and improved than the ones we did. But hey, I was there at the first one, right? I then went on to video games, and I worked on Sid Meier's Civilization. I wasn't the designer, obviously. That was Sid and Bruce Shelley, but I was there. I then went to id Software, did most of the levels for Doom and Doom 2, worked on Quake, went from there to Ensemble Studios, where I worked on all of the Age of Empire series, Age of Mythology, and the Halo Wars. And from then I spent the 2 years in the wilderness teaching at a college. And now I have founded my own board game company. So I started out on paper games, went to video games, and I'm back to paper games. And my current company is called Petersen Games, because why not be a giant egomaniac and name it after myself? So I did.
You know what? I can't hold that against you. I don't think Pew Games would come off as well as Petersen Games does.
If you did shooters and you called it Pew Pew Games because you had your
brother. There we go. What inspired you to create your own game company?
Okay, I went from technology to board game because it was kind of happenstance. What had happened is that I had left the university because it turns out that I've always not been a fan of bureaucratic connections, and it turns out that universities have super extreme powerful bureaucracies, probably because the things they are making decisions over don't matter, and they're powerless stuff like who wrote this book, and so they have to expand their internal power to make up for that. I don't know. Anyway, so I hated that. So I was sitting there with my savings getting ever smaller, and said, Wendy, we're going to take a job working for an iPhone company in India, because they offered me a really sweet deal. It was like a 6-figure salary and part ownership of the company and my own apartment and my own driver, because they said, do not drive in Hyderabad if you're a Westerner. That's certain death. So we got a driver. We had it all set to go. And just before I went, some friends of mine talked me into going on the Kickstarter and promoting and doing a Lovecraft-based game, because I'm famous for Lovecraft. And so I figured, well, I do have a pretty good name in the game. People have heard of me as a designer because I've been around for 40 years. They've grown long in the tooth doing games, right? So I'll parlay my name and the Lovecraft thing, and maybe this will get a couple $100,000, and I can use that to boost my salary when I go off and go to India for a year. I was planning to go there only for a year or two. And then the Kickstarter, instead of doing 200,000, did 6 times that much. And so I had to call the guys in India and say, hey, I'm going to form a company and try to run this campaign. And they were sad, but
that was in 2015, correct?
That was in 2013.
13. I apologize.
The game came out in 2015 because it turned out that they had to invent new technology at the factory to make my giant figures. And there was other slowdowns, so it was slower than I thought it would be. And in fact, all the mighty $1 million that we got from the Kickstarter was gobbled up in costs and by my former partners, who looted it as best they could before they left. But that happens. But still, the remainder of the money founded Petersen Games and got the Cthulhu Wars out there. And then I had this game company, kind of because I was going to do this game, to support myself in India as a sideline, and now it became my vocation. And so I didn't really plan. I didn't plan on it being me running my own game company. It just sort of happened.
So your side gig became your gig.
Yeah, well, that happened before when I was going to graduate school at Cal in Berkeley. If you're not familiar with the jargon of the graduate schools, and to support myself, I got a job typesetting at Chaosium, who I'd done some freelance stuff for. And among them Call of Cthulhu, which hadn't come out yet, and then I kept spending more and more times editing and working at Chaosium, and less times on being a graduate student in zoology. And finally, once more, my avocation of gaming became the vocation of gaming. And I dropped out of graduate school, which I'm not recommending to other people necessarily, but it worked for me. And so that happened again. I went from video games to board games, and it turned out that I really like working on tabletop games, which I'd forgotten since I hadn't done it for 25 years. And the reason is that in a computer company, you have a giant team to satisfy that you must work with, which has its advantages. They're smart guys. You can bounce ideas off them. But sometimes it's nice to have a little tiny team of me and a couple artists and an assistant, not have 50 guys I have to satisfy. I don't have to wait for the programmers to get the next build up before I try a new system, which is kind of nice. I don't have 8 layers of people in suits over me because it's huge money. So they have to watch the money really carefully. I can just do crazy things that I want to do, like Cthulhu Wars, which would never have flown before Kickstarter, when I can appeal directly to the fans. And my games can come out a lot faster. Well, in theory, they can come out a lot faster than a computer game. Computer games take 1.5 years, 2 years. My games may take that long, but I can do multiple games kind of in parallel.
You're very aggressive with it too. You have Return to Planet Apocalypse coming out within next year, as well as. Is it next year or this year?
No, I think it's out now.
Is it out now? Return? Oh shit!
No, it's not. No, are you talking about the? Sorry,
because you have Dinosaur 1944.
1944 is coming out next year. We got Hyperspace coming out. We have Return to Planet Apocalypse, which is an expansion to the existing Planet Apocalypse. And of course we are keeping Cthulhu Wars in print, and then God's War is coming through, and then we have other games coming out. Last year, I published Cthulhu Wars Duel and Invasion of the Brood, and so there's a lot of games.
Petersen Games is very aggressive with its output of product. It's completely amazing.
I mean, we're kind of a boutique company, famous for expensive luxury games like Cthulhu Wars, but the fact is we do all kinds of games. We do card games, we do kids games.
Yes.
We do straight up role-playing stuff, like for D&D.
We actually used your Cthulhu Mythos, the Pact of the Skull, in our International Taverner Players. One of our players was a warlock and took the Cthulhu Mythos in it. So awesome. we absolutely, she very much wanted me to tell you thank you for that too. She absolutely loved it.
Well, we try to be interesting and do things that haven't been done before.
Yeah. Why? So that I wanted to bring up this is, you said your games are boutique. They're very niche for your purchasers, your customers. They're huge. They're big games.
See, that's just what I said. I said we're known for expensive luxury games, but we have lots of little games too. We have a game called 2 Minute Dino Deal, which is a card game which you literally play in 2 minutes.
I did not know that one. That's cool.
But you can play with your kids.
So let me ask you this: why do large minis? It
grew out of me doing the game that I was going to do to support myself when I went away to work in Hyderabad. Okay, I wanted this is going to be, now one thing you have to understand as a game designer is that I was a game designer from 1981 to 2013, which is 33 years. Anyway, some huge number of years, like decades, longer than most of my fans, older than most of my fans, right? And in all of that time, there was exactly one game that was entirely my idea from start to finish. And that was the game Hyperspeed, or actually Lightspeed, that I did for Microprose. Every other game, someone came to me and told me what to do. And that was fine. I was able to make the game my own, like even Call of Cthulhu. Like Chaosium said, I went to them and said, I want to do a expansion for RuneQuest based on Lovecraft. And they said, now we're doing a whole game based on modern age Cthulhu. And I said, oh. And then they said, you want to do it? I said, yes. So I'm always told what to do. And I'm not complaining. The man told me what to do. The man paid my salary. He has the right to do it. But this was going to be my last game. I figure I'm going to go to India and going to work on iPhone games. This is going to be the last game I'm ever going to do that's going to be completely my idea or largely my idea. So I'm going to have it be my swan song. It's going to be the ultimate Sandy Petersen game. And so I said, among other things, I want the figures to be 28 millimeter scale so that I can use them in role-playing games. That's why they're big.
That's smart. Hats off to you.
And every attempt to make the game smaller or cheaper, I fought against, because I said, no, because this is my last game ever. I'm never going to do another game I'll do other games, but not games based on what my ideas are. Then it turned out I was completely wrong. And instead of my swan song, it was my phoenix of rebirth. And now I do my own games all the time.
So is that the large miniatures? Do you consider that you're, to an extent? I understand you have lots of other games. Is that your calling card for
I
Petersen
guess
Games?
kind of, you know, because I make large figures like in Dinosaur 1944. The soldiers are 28 millimeter scale soldiers. Well, I want the dinosaurs to be 28 millimeter scale too. So if I have a T-Rex, I want it to be 40 feet long, like a real T-Rex.
And you guys put
scale toward 40 feet, not actual 40 feet. And so our T-Rex is this giant plastic figure that your 2-year-old can chew on.
You guys at Petersen Games put so much TLC, so much detail into your miniatures. Case in point, look at Dinosaur 1944.
One of the toys all the kids had was bags of dinosaurs. Yes. And another toy all the kids had was bags of Army Men. I don't know if that's a thing today, but so if you're 9 years old and you have a bag of Army Men and a bag of dinosaurs, like they're gonna fight.
Yeah.
You know? And that might be why there were so many comic books at the time that were about soldiers fighting dinosaurs.
Makes total
sense. There was
sense.
A ton of Sergeant Rock was always shooting at dinosaurs. You know, so it just like was a huge thing then. It's not now, I guess, so much, but why shouldn't it be?
So let me ask you this. What lessons did you take from doing PC games? Did you like Quake and Doom and Age of Empires? What lessons did you take from those and to put those
so one of the things I took from them were I took techniques used in computer games and applied them to board games. Let me give you an example. My game Planet Apocalypse, which is a cooperative game, I took tower defense and applied it to the board game. So there's a tower defense element. It's not all tower defense, but there was a strong tower defense element to Planet Apocalypse. Basically, you set up team ambushes to shoot the monsters as they come by. And tower defense is absolutely a video game idea, not a board game idea. Okay. I also, for Cthulhu Wars, which you have played, you may have noticed that the spell books work exactly like video game achievements.
They do. Yes, they do. You accomplish X goal, you get this.
You do the goal, you get the even if that goal is then failed later on because you lost one of your bases, doesn't matter. You got the goal, so you keep the advantage. So that's straight out of video game achievements. Other things I did was that the way that we play tested the games at id and other companies, I have adopted that to board games. I've talked to a lot of other board game designers, and I don't play test the way they do. So I got that from the video game. One of the differences that I think I play test a lot more than they do with more groups, and I don't do blind testing, which they like to do. But in video games, you don't do much blind testing. You're always watching all the play tests. So I do that, and I do iterations every day and make changes. So that was a thing. And finally, I spent 11 years at Ensemble Studios, basically balancing Age of Empires and Age of Mythology and Halo Wars. I was like, I had other tasks, but one of the tasks was to balance all those games to make them fair. And so I took that into doing my own strategy games like Cthulhu Wars. And one of the things I said, well, if I can balance asymmetrical factions in the Age of Empires, I certainly can do it in Cthulhu Wars. So you notice that a trademark of mine is asymmetrical stuff. Like when you're playing Yellow Signed, it does not feel like Cthulhu.
No, it absolutely you
feel like you're a whole different civ, but you also feel like you're super awesome. And if you can only get your act together, you're certain to win. But everyone else feels the same way, and they're all correct. It's just hard to get your act together.
We definitely live in that age of technology. We live in the world of VR. We live in the world of AR. You are a game designer. You are an RPG book designer. You do have it in digital version. Where do you see RPG books and board games in the era of VR and computers?
Well, on my iPhone, I have about 80. I downloaded a package of 80 Horatio Alger novels. He wrote in like 1860s, 1870s, and yet here I am reading these novels from the 1860s about how to make it in New York of 1850 on my phone. So I read books on Kindle, but a book is an old-fashioned thing. Right now, there is Tabletop Simulator. There is Tabletopia to play board. I actually play test my current game. I'm working on Terror Paths and Starship Captain on Tabletop Simulator with people all over the world. I just played a game on Monday with a Belgian, a South African, and a British guy, and we're playing a board game, and it looks like a board game, and it feels like a board game, and they're rolling dice. And yet it is virtual reality. I think there's a lot of role-playing games going right now in Zoom. I still like face-to-face stuff as much as I can get it. And my son, who's my assistant game designer, has especially been finding for lately. We're excited that our local venue is opening up again. So we can go there with our game things and do it. So I think that in the same way that movies have not, in fact, completely exterminated live theater, that VR and computers has not exterminated board games. In fact, it's possible that it has partly rejuvenated them by the existence of the fact that I can now play with people that I can't get to,
and that's fair.
I mean, far away.
We have a group that's literally in England, and a gentleman that was in Australia, and we were able to play Dungeons and Dragons together.
And yet Dungeons and Dragons is an old-fashioned tabletop game, but you can do it thanks to that. You can also I would say that one of the things that has made this a kind of golden age of gaming is that I can use the mighty internet to find out if a game sucks, or at least find out if person X thinks a game sucks, which I can there's crowdfunding which enabled me to get Cthulhu Wars done, which is a thing that could not have existed before high technology, where I was able. Cthulhu Wars is a game that no game publisher would ever have done. It's super expensive to make. It's a weird topic. I hadn't done a board game since Arkham Horror in 1988, so it was a risky thing. Probably they would see, and it has giant figures. Who can afford that? So no game company looked into it. I asked some about it. Nobody wanted to publish it. So I went onto crowdfunding, and immediately I said, "Are you weird like me? Do you want this game?" And they did. So
now, do you feel like that your name played into some of that? If someone was a new designer that didn't have your cachet and your name recognition, is that viable as opposed to having to go to Milton Bradley or Wizards of the Coast or some other large company if someone were just starting?
I am absolutely certain that my name and reputation helped me make Cthulhu Wars a success. I am not ashamed of exploiting that to the greatest degree possible. It's one of my assets, right? And it's not like I got it the hard way by spending 30 years designing games. So why not exploit it? I agree that if someone with no renown had done a Cthulhu Wars, it maybe not have done as well. But the fact that even me, with my renown, wasn't able to pitch Cthulhu Wars to a Fantasy Flight, for example, then it's got to be even harder for someone else, right? But I do see games on Kickstarter and Indiegogo that succeed that are people that I don't recognize, so it's possible. Okay. They may require more background than me. They can't just. Even I can't totally just coast on my laurels, right? I have to, at some point I have to deliver.
One of the things you also talked about earlier was, Call of Cthulhu comes out in 1981. I remember playing Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s during the Satanic Panic and all of that, all the satanic scares about role-playing games, how they were going to just corrupt the children. And now it seems like Dungeons and Dragons and other games like that are mainstream. That people who I would not have suspected played tabletop role-playing games and games like Cthulhu Wars or anything like that, all of a sudden, their eyes light up because they're into that. How has that changed in your lifetime? Or, what do you think the causes of that are?
Well, I think part of it was that was the spread of video games in the 90s. When I came out with Doom, for example, I had Tipper Gore and Joe Lieberman holding my game up in Congress and announcing it because obviously it was getting kids murdered all over the country.
You and Twisted Sister.
What?
You and Twisted Sister.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. I had allies, right? But I don't remember Tipper Gore and Lieberman caring about Twisted Sister. That was probably a Republican thing. But for some reason, it was Democrats attacking my game for killing people. But the thing is, as gaming became more and more prevalent, more people got consoles in their house. Like, no one was afraid of it anymore. It just became part of the background radiation of life in the modern world. And so it becomes, and you watch Stranger Things and it starts right off with these kids playing D&D, and you're supposed to understand what that is if you watch the show. In fact, I didn't pick up when I first watched the show that it was supposed to happen in the early 80s. And I picked up on it. I walked in a couple of days and I picked up. I said, "Oh, this is early '80s," because the Demogorgon figure they had for the game was the one that I had bought in the '70s that I had a copy of. It said, "Hey, they don't make that figure anymore. What's it doing to this video?" So that was actually a pretty good case of them like walking the walk, because they went and found this obscure old Demogorgon figure by Grenadier Models.
How did the pandemic affect Petersen Games?
Massive returns from our distributors. Now, most game companies, including us, have a policy where distributors can't return product.
Mm.
But when the game stores all shut down, the distributor said, "We're going to return the product," and that's how it is. And we could have refused it and burnt our bridges or sucked it up, and we sucked it up. We had a large French company that owed us hundreds of thousands of dollars go belly up and then try to bill us for the translation. What they did is we published Cthulhu Wars for them in French, and we shipped it to them. And then they delivered it to their fans and took the money. And then they said, "Oh, we're bankrupt," and didn't give us the money. So that was pretty awesome. So we're actually technically on the list of creditors, but since it's in France, there's a long list of other creditors who are all French. So, we're not going to get anything. But so those things all hurt us pretty bad. Yeah. On the other hand, we also released Sandy Petersen's Cthulhu Mythos for D&D during that time and got it promulgated pretty well. And that came in this year, and we were actually making quite a bit of cash off that partly made up for it. But I personally will be glad when people can walk into the open air without fear of overt death and destruction, because it has not benefited our company the way that some lucky companies seem to feel. I guess you can say we got benefited because we were like first at the trough for government assistance when that happened, because we have a really on the ball business manager.
Okay.
But we wouldn't have had to be at the trough if it wasn't for the COVID. So,
See, I'm thinking indoors, you're more likely to buy more board games and more games.
What happened is that our distributor sales plummeted, it got very small, and our direct sales through our website went up.
I believe that.
Okay.
I believe that. So let's go ahead and
some companies probably adapt to do it faster or smarter than we did, so they did better. We kind of have figured it out by now, and now we're doing better with that. But initially we were like trying to make the jump, and
so you guys are officially celebrating the 40th anniversary of Call of Cthulhu.
Yes.
So tell us about this beast. How did this come into fruition for you, like Call of Cthulhu? I know you kind of talked about it a little bit here and there. But
I did talk a little about it before. So let me tell you two stories of the dawn of Call of Cthulhu. So here's one story. At the time, Lovecraft was pitifully unknown. Everyone thought he was a terrible hack. Okay, that was, if you heard about him, you thought he was a horrible hack. Some obscure guy from the 30s that wasn't worth reading because he wrote for Pulp Fiction. We should go off and read James Joyce instead, right? Or whatever. So, but I unconditionally love Lovecraft. Well, Chaosium also thought Lovecraft was a terrible hack, but they were really smart. Okay. Now, normally, when a game company is going to publish a license for something that they don't respect, they will do a kind of tongue-in-cheek, campy version of it. You see this in movies all the time. It's why the third superhero movie in every series is usually bad, because the original director has left. They bring in a new director that doesn't respect comic books, right, or superheroes, and so he says, "Well, really, no one can actually genuinely like Batman, so I'm going to do a tongue-in-cheek version. It'll be great." And then you get Batman and Robin, right? Okay. Remember Robin? Yeah.
No, you're right.
Right. And so that's what happens. So Chaosium, however, was really brainy, and they said, "We know we don't respect Lovecraft, but Sandy does. We won't tell him we don't like Lovecraft, and we'll have him do it. He will do a great job, and we'll just do the game." And from what is done, so they never told us that they didn't like Lovecraft, and I just figured they did, and I did this whole game. And in fact, a funny story: the reason that it's set in the 1920s, Call of Cthulhu, is because I thought Lovecraft was writing for his modern era. He had airplane exploration of the Antarctic. He had submarines. He had ultraviolet light. He had the discovery of Pluto. He was very interested in the edge of science, right? But Chaosium also knew they had to like something about the game to be able to work on it effectively and enthusiastically. So what they hung their hats on was, we'll set it in the 20s when they were written. And the 20s are cool, which they are. And so they did the 20s source book and stuff, and that kind of got them enough vested in the game they could do a great job on it, which they did. But But yeah, they didn't like Call of Cthulhu. They know I did. And then my enthusiasm apparently seeped through the text. And later on, the Chaosium started liking Lovecraft. When they saw what a big hit it was, they said, oh, well, maybe it's better than we thought. And they started reading the stories, and then they changed their mind, right? But that's part of it. Here is another part of the story. So the game came out after months of delay on November 13th, Friday, November 13th, 1981. While they were trying to get it done, the various printing presses at Lampa, which is the company we use, I don't even know if they're still around, but the printing presses would like break down and have weird things. The lady who was typesetting the manuscript had a nervous breakdown herself. Finally, it comes out on November 13th during the worst thunderstorm the San Francisco Bay Area had had in many decades. You could look it up. So and during that thunderstorm, every printing machine basically broke except for the one doing the Call of Cthulhu. Okay, and then it comes out, and then from then on at Chaosium, whenever there was any kind of hiccup or slowdown or some odd occurrence, we always attributed to the Curse of Cthulhu. Oh, that's the Curse of Cthulhu hitting us now again. We called it that. But in retrospect, like my career got launched with Cthulhu, with Call of Cthulhu. Cthulhu has fed and housed and clothed me and my family for 40 years. So really, he's just been a benefit to me. So I don't believe in the Curse of Cthulhu anymore.
You did the right sacrifices to Cthulhu.
I guess so, There's a reason that in the same place that you may have a black velvet painting of Elvis, I have a oil painting of Cthulhu by Tom Sullivan.
Oh, that's awesome. I was assuming you were going to say like you had the Necronomicon or something over to the side.
I do have several versions of the Necronomicon, but they are sadly all fake.
Let me ask you this.
I've got them interested in reading the story. I mean, I'm told all the time by people that because of Call of Cthulhu or whatever, they read Lovecraft. But I think that liking my games might get you to read a Lovecraft story, but then after that, it's got to be Lovecraft that keeps you reading.
So you're the gateway.
Yeah. Well, look, I will go watch a movie because my one of my kids tells me it's good, but if I don't like it, I'm not going to watch the next movie by that guy.
Touche. That's fair.
So Lovecraft is what keeps them coming. Lovecraft brings. I might send them there, but Lovecraft has them come back. If that's fair. So
what is your fascination with Lovecraft? Just horror and monsters?
The things I really like about Lovecraft. Well, here I'll do a very simple version of it. Okay, conventional horror up to Lovecraft worked like this: you have people in the normal, rational world. Then there is some kind of horrific intrusion. There's a ghost. There's a serial killer. There's a supernatural event, and then the event resolves, and the survivors are back in the normal world. Right? Mm-hmm. The way Lovecraft worked is you start in the normal world, then there's a horrible intrusion, and because of the intrusion, you realize that normal world that you believed in doesn't exist at all. And then at the end, you can't go back to it because you now know that all of humanity is an organic stain on the surface of the globe that any moment randomly Cthulhu could rise up and wipe out. Or you realize that the whole world is really just geometrical relationships that connect to other dimensions, and none of it's really there. Or you realize that all of humanity was a mistake by aliens that came to Earth in the Carboniferous and spawned, and there's still remnants of them around, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. There's some awful thing, and Lovecraft, and then he just leaves you stranded in this new horrible reality. And that's why at the end of the stories, the guy says, we can't let anyone know, not because he's trying to keep it hidden for some governmental reason, which is usually what they do in other movies, but because he's terrified that if humanity finds out, we will either go mad or, as he puts it, retreat to the safety of a new dark age where we don't have to think about it.
Once you see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that is not done. Plus he has these amazing ideas in his stories that I first read it when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I've never read anything like this. Here I am reading The Shadow of Innsmouth, and it's not just a monster; it's a whole town where everyone's a monster.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Mine was Monster of Madness. Yeah.
I had the fortunate experience, which is probably impossible to have today, of reading the story of the Call of Cthulhu and having no idea what a Cthulhu was. I didn't know if it was a creature or a word, if it was big or small or anything. I'm just reading the story. What's this weird alien word? It's probably not something. I'm not saying that people are worse off now. It's just I had a different experience than what you guys had. Because when you can't read Call of Cthulhu without knowing who he is.
That's true. You know what? That's absolutely true. Yeah, no. Now let me ask you this: where can people find you?
Okay, the place to find me is you can go to petersengames.com and see my awesome stuff and buy it. You can sign on to my newsletter there if you want, and which comes out weekly, and that we give you pretty sweet discounts and deals. Like currently we have a deal where you can get our PDFs. Hey, there's an example of VR. We can get PDFs of our role-playing stuff for really discounted prices. You can also find me on YouTube as Sandy of Cthulhu. And I do a video every Friday about different topics. So like last week was Scream Queens, where I have a little quiz of identifying who this lady is and why she's a Scream Queen. The week before, it was me playing Doom with my granddaughter, who's 11. Awesome. So that's kind of fun to watch. So those are I will end with a fun story about Call of Cthulhu for you.
Okay.
So a lot of people are unaware that Call of Cthulhu is fabulously successful in Japan. In fact, there are more copies of Call of Cthulhu sold in Japan than the rest of the world combined. It's that popular, and it's well known elsewhere, right? I mean, it's in like 20 languages, but Japan is the biggest one. It is also way bigger than D&D or Pathfinder or any other role-playing game in Japan. It's the biggest role-playing system. So the average Call of Cthulhu player worldwide is an 18 to 35 Japanese woman.
Huh.
As a result, I got invited to Japan in 2019 with my wife. That's my fee for going to conventions. They say, what do you charge? I say, you must also bring my wife. And then she gets to go around the city and wherever it is and enjoy herself. And I spend my time in a nerdy little room with a bunch of other game geeks. But I score big karma with her, which is what I care about.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so we went to Japan. And I do my usual shtick, I meet people and I have seminar, I gave speeches. So I'm giving my speech. And at the end of the speech, we had like 45 minutes or an hour of questions. So everyone has questions for me, like you do, for example. So they asked me how I came up with the sanity system. And for those who have not played Call of Cthulhu, the sanity system is generally considered a pretty groundbreaking idea because it makes your players act as though their characters are scared. Because they're like, monster hide the rise. It's a really interesting thing. Because normally in a role-playing game, if you say there's a monster coming out of the hall, everyone says, I got to see the monster. What's it like? Where is it in the monster manual? But in Call of Cthulhu, you're like, I'm running and hiding because if I see it, I'll go nuts. So sanity is this huge deal, right? So they're asking me how I did it, and I talked a little about it, and then I said I couldn't have done any of this Call of Cthulhu stuff without my wife's support, which was true. And I had her stand up in the audience, and everyone gave her some applause. Okay, so far so good. Then she sits down. Then after the the speech, a bunch of people came up to interview me. There was like there was a podcast, and there was like a blogger, and there was an e-magazine, and the kind of things that happened to me. So I'm talking to them, and they all had the same question. They say, "So Wendy designed the sanity system," and I was like, "What?" And apparently, the way that the translator had translated what I said, when I said I couldn't have done it without Wendy, it had translated as Wendy designed the sanity system. After the first question, I decided, sure, why not? Go for it. So from then on, whenever they asked me the question, I was like, absolutely, Wendy designed the sanity system. So now my wife is a famous game designer in Japan, at least in various publications.
Is she making you pay residuals to her?
She has not yet made me pay residuals to her. But she tells me that the reason she came up with the sanity system is because I drive her crazy. So that makes sense.
I literally thought that's where the story was going, was something to do. She drives you crazy, but that's way better. That's awesome. Mr. Petersen, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
As always, please like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We are on Audible and Apple. Please remember to rate and review. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, so please like and follow us at DNA Pod, and on Twitter at NerdDNA Podcast. And as always, I am Steve, and join with me tonight is Mr. David Perry and Mr. Sandy Petersen. Thank you, and good night.
Signing off.
All right. Thank you so much. You have a good one.
You bet. Yog Sothoth Neblod Zin.
Thank you for your time.
This is Josh.
I'm Lewanika.
And I'm Glenn.
At Tabletop Journeys, we bring more than 75 years of role-playing experience in countless game systems. But Dungeons & Dragons is where we call home.
We formed Tabletop Journeys so we could do what we love, create epic adventures in fantastic lands with amazing people like you.
Listen to our podcast to catch our take on using the D&D core rules, homebrew content, and epic player-driven storytelling to make your next role legendary.
Also, keep an eye out for Tabletop Journeys' original content coming soon to DM's Guild.